Inaction will lead to more atrocities. That's the argument that the French Prime Minister Jean-Marc Ayrault has been making in front of the Parliament in Paris today. This is a 2-hour-long debate was held on whether or not France should use military force against Syria.
France has been leading Western calls for action in Syria since the early days of the crisis, but now that the British Parliament has voted not to get involved and Washington will hold a congressional vote, Monsieur Hollande finds himself in a somewhat isolated position, although he has ruled out the prospect of France going it alone against the Assad regime.
Well, in a moment, we'll hear from British journalist and expert in diplomacy and security, Anne Penketh. But first, Nabila Ramdani, a Franco-Algerian journalist who's been covering the debate, told our producer Alid John how France's history is one reason this is such an important issue for the nation.
Clearly, there's a particular amount of interest in the situation in Syria here in France for obvious historical reasons. France had a mandate to run Syria after the First World War, and this has lasted right up until the 1940s. So today was clearly an important day. President Hollande said as much yesterday. He said that today's parliamentary debate would be very important to inform his decision-making. Having said that, Hollande is the supreme commander of the French armed forces and does not need a parliamentary approval to go to war. However, it's also very clear that the British parliamentary vote, and indeed Obama now consulting his own Congress in America, may well have had an effect on Hollande's thinking, his strategy, and especially his schedule for potential military action. He has also made it clear that he wants everything to be done according to sensible schedule, which allows all the information to be made available, and that's precisely why the French Prime Minister, Jean-Marc Ayrault, offered intelligence yesterday, which is said to prove that Assad used chemical weapons against hundreds of people, including children. And the French are also waiting for the United Nations report into the use of chemical weapons. But today, the atmosphere was quite heated inside Parliament, with the French Prime Minister reinforcing the fact that they want to punish Bashar al-Assad for his use of chemical weapons and for the atrocities he committed over the last 2.5 years more generally. He reinforced the need for a political solution to remove Bashar al-Assad from power, but didn't rule out military action. Opposition leader Christian Jacob opposed, military intervention. He said he opposed his 3 no's, as he put it: no to a punitive military action with no defined objective, no to intervention with no international legal basis, and no to giving up French foreign policy to follow the American lead if military action was taken. But overall, what the Prime Minister concluded is that there will be no vote in Parliament if military action is considered, and that is despite the fact that 74% of the French public would very much like to see Parliament have a say over the issue.
This is an important debate for Hollande, but is it not the case that he has in fact already made up his mind, which would perhaps only be changed should the American Congress not vote to approve hostilities?
64% of the country is against the French getting involved in a military action in Syria. President Hollande seems pretty determined to punish Bashar al-Assad, as he put it, and he comes across to some as a rather mild-mannered figure, but is in fact a hawk when it comes to foreign policy. And his foreign minister, Laurent Fabius, can be similarly understated, but has proved himself to be uncompromising and rigorous when it comes to the use of military force. Remember, Hollande, of course, launched a military intervention in Mali earlier this year. It has to be noted that, everybody has an interest in getting this absolutely right in France. France has a big Syrian community. Have seen today pro-Assad demonstrations right next to the French Assembly where the debate was taking place, and anti-Assad protesters were arrested by riot police. So clearly there's an awful lot of tension around the issue in France, particularly among the Syrian community here in Paris. And President Hollande would like to see the French involved in Syria to establish himself on the world stage. So the stakes are very high for him.
Nabila Ramdani there talking to Alid.